Hi guys, I've got a little bit of a different one for you today. It's Gorkamorka, but what I wanted to try and do today is basically give you an idea of how to start a Gorkamorka mob. It's one of the main hurdles in getting into the game and also in figuring out what miniatures to buy as well. So I want to take this opportunity to basically just explain how to start a mob and the main considerations. Now, I did want to say at this point that I'm not going to go too much into sort of tactics and the best choices and that sort of thing. What I'm trying to cover is the very, very basics of the concept of starting a Gorkamorka mob and starting out on a campaign. So, yeah, don't expect any crazy tactics, at least at this point. I can't guarantee that then there's not going to be more videos going into the other aspects of the game, but for now, all I wanted to do is go over this really. Right then, so basically, I'm going to start off with what you need. Now, the models that you need, you start off, you need a knob. So this is your leader, it's the head orc. Now in the old game, they were represented by just normal miniatures, normal sized orcs, but of course now we've got the much bigger knob orcs. So it's up to you really whether you want to go one way or the other way. It's one of those things, I suppose. I personally have been using the larger knobs to represent mine. So, what makes him special? Well, he starts off with a better ballistic skill and weapon skill. Now, he starts off with a lower leadership, and until he's won his first game, that doesn't go up. So it will go higher once he's won his first game, but to start off with, he's almost got the same stats as the normal orc boys, except weapon skill and ballistic skill, of course, are higher. Now, so you need a knob, so you have to have a leader. Next, you have to have vehicles. Now in Gorkamorka, your whole mob has to be on vehicles to enter the table. The idea being that they're off in the skid somewhere. They're not wandering around on foot. They are on bikes, buggies, tracks and trucks, basically. So you need enough vehicles, or a large enough vehicle, to have your whole mob on it. So that's one thing to consider. If you're planning on having 5 guys and you're not planning on having more than one truck, you might want to make that back bed a little bit longer or wider than you were planning. Right then, so you need a knob, you need some vehicles from to go on. Of course, if you've got vehicles, you need spanners. Now the spanners are the mechs of the Gorkamorka world. They look after the vehicles, and of course, you have to have them to maintain them as well. Right, so you need 1 spanner per vehicle. Spanner is basically the same stats as an orc boy, except they have the ability, or rather they open up the ability for you to take vehicles. So 1 spanner per vehicle, except for bikes, whereby 1 spanner can maintain 3 different bikes. So that is the other requirement. Now you've got the boys, which are basically the bread and butter of your gang. Every model, when it gets to, I think it's 21 XP, turns into a boy anyway. So even if you choose youths, they will become boys before long. And you've got, as I just mentioned, youths. Now youths are your cheaper model. Now they've got lower BS and weapon skill, so ballistic skill and weapon skill is lower than a normal boy or spanner. But they can become better than starting boys. So they have, I think it's 2 or 3 opportunities to get advancement skills, which happens roughly every 10 XP. So between, I can't remember the exact details, but yeah, they have several chances to get skills before they even become a boy. So there is a great chance for those guys to be more powerful, basically. But of course, they're a lot cheaper, they're not as good. Use them as your basic fodder in a hope that they survive and then become boys, is the general idea. So then we've got slavers. So these last 2, slavers and grots, I'm not going to recommend these, basically, for basic starting mob. So slavers enable you to take grots and diggers. They have whips and things and keep them in order because grots and diggers are quite unruly. They can also put, if you've captured one of your opponent's mob, you can actually put them to work in between games to earn your income if you've got a slaver as well. So that's pretty cool. Grots, of course, are your little Gretchen fellas, your grots. Again, they're cannon fodder. Essentially, they're complete fodder, but they're dirt cheap, to be honest. So you want to use them if you're looking for weight in numbers, essentially. Now, I'm not going to go into any of the other books, like the Digger Knob book, which is why I haven't mentioned diggers here, other than the saying that slavers can lead to you taking them. And I'm not going to go into Grot Rebels, because again, that's a separate supplement. I'm going to keep it just to the basic rule book at this point, because my knowledge isn't that extensive on any of it, to be fair, but certainly not on those two things. Right then, so those are the models you're going to be taking. So let's have a look at the equipment. So you've got your knob, your spanners for your vehicles themselves, and you've got an assortment of boys and youths to make up the numbers for picking up this scrap and all that sort of stuff. Now you're going to need to equip them all with the weapons that they need. So each model comes with a knife as standard. Of course, that helps with close combat. You're going to need to choose a gun. So you've got an assortment of gun. Again, I'm not going to go into the guns in detail because I don't want this video to run on for hours. It probably is going to be a fairly long one as it is. Of course, there's an opportunity for me to talk about them in future videos. So you're going to choose a gun. You've got two-handed guns, or you've got pistols and close combat weapons. Of course, pistols can be used for ranged attacks, fairly short, and also in close combat, alongside the close combat weapons like choppers and all that sort of stuff. So then you've also got hand weapons. So you're going to want to choose a hand weapon if you want to do close combat rather than just shooting. Interesting thing to mention: drivers can shoot out of their trucks or whatnot if you give them a pistol. So that's a thing to consider, really, is giving them a pistol so that they can join in with the shooting if they're in a immobilized truck, or if they're just waiting for an orc to come back with some scrap. Okay, then you've got armor. Now, armor is one of those things, really. For an orc, there's armor can be quite expensive, especially if you go for the heavy stuff. And even then, you're only getting a 50% chance of save rather than what you're used to in games like 40k, where if you pay a lot, you can get a sort of 2-up save on any army, essentially. So it's one of those things. You can pay for a shield or whatnot, and you'll get like 1 in 6 chance, so a 6+, that sort of thing. But again, I'm not going to go into any great detail on that. So you got your models. You've given them guns, hand weapons, and armor. Basically it. So we'll move on to the vehicles. Now the vehicles, you can choose gubbins, and then you can choose weapons for it as well. So gubbins are things like your boarding planks, your wrecking balls, reinforced ram, so you can do more damage when you're ramming front on, that sort of thing. Reduce damage when you crash, I believe, though don't quote me on that one. Need to read that up on that one. And then you've got heavy weapons. So your heavy weapons are your things like your rocket launchers, your spear guns, your heavy shooters. Of course, something interesting to mention, or rather something specific to Gorkamorka if you're coming from a 40k background, is that only the vehicles can have heavy weapons. The orcs are very much set to the weapons that you choose, the smaller ones, basically. But all these weapons can be customized later in the game, during the campaign. Right then, so that's it. You've got your vehicles, you've got your mob, you've equipped your mob, you've equipped your vehicles, and you're good to go. So what I wanted to start off with, or rather finish with, is a few considerations while you're building your mob. Now, you need to choose between Gork and Mork, whether they're Gorkas or they're Morkas. So, I think it's Gorkas are cunningly brutal, and Morkas are brutally cunning. I think that's the right way around. And basically what it means is Gorkas have the option of choosing a lot of the more offensive skill trees, because of course there's a selection of skills that when they go up the advancement, which is every 10 XP or so, they get to roll on one of the advancements, or rather one of the skills that you choose. So, different types, Gorkas and Morkas, have access to the different parts of that table. The more sort of fighty ones come under the Gorka table, and the Morkas have the more sort of cunning and driving ones. So if you're thinking of relying a lot on driving and that sort of thing, you're probably better off going for Morkas, and if you're just looking to just beat down on your opponent, I'd go for the Gorkas, to be honest. Right then, another consideration is weapons jam in Gorkamorka. So if you've got an orc and all he's got is a shooter and hasn't got any hand to hand, and all you're thinking of using him for is shooting at people, you might want to choose another weapon for him to carry, like a pistol, for example. Because if that big weapon jams, that's gone for the rest of the game. You're going to want to have another weapon to fall back on. So that's always something worth considering. If you've got some extra points, a couple of teeth, sorry, not points, teeth, a couple of teeth left over, stick them into another gun. Right then, interesting one here. Youths as drivers. Now, youths have the same stats as boys, except for weapon skill and ballistic skill. Now, the interesting one here is in driving, the only stat that really matters is leadership. Now, a boy, a spanner, and a youth all have the same leadership. So, consider putting your youths in your cars and your trucks as drivers, because they're going to be able to pull off the same moves. And when they've sort of leveled up a few times, you might well have a really good driver in there with some pretty cool skills. So that's worth considering. Rather than putting a spanner or a boy in the driving seat, stick a youth in there instead. You'll do just as good job in driving those beasts. Right. An interesting thing, or rather an important thing to remember is guns are a lot less devastating in Gorkamorka than melee is. Melee combat is a lot more efficient at taking down your opponent than guns. A lot of the time you'll find yourself shooting at people and at other orcs, and you'll just be missing, or it can be quite frustrating. So it's worth keeping in mind, really. And if you're going to be running into close quarters to pick up scrap and things, chances are you're going to end up smacking them anyway. So it's just something to consider when you're building your first mob. Right, along the same lines, vehicles ramming other vehicles is much more effective than shooting. Now, shooting, you have to hit, then you've got to penetrate, and then you've got to choose a location and all that sort of stuff. When you're ramming someone, you basically get guaranteed hits, essentially. You don't need to roll to penetrate. You literally, if you hit somebody in the right way, whether it be a T-bone or whatnot, straight away you're rolling to see where you've damaged the vehicle, which of course is a lot more devastating than having to roll to see if you hit them in the first place and then to see if you penetrate. So it's much more effective at taking vehicles out if you just ram. And of course there's a lot more orky if you're all bashing into each other, and it's one of the main reasons I just love this game. It's the vehicles, to be honest. Which is why I like, when I made my own scenario, which is why I like to make it a rolling road, because I like the idea of the orcs having to stay on the vehicles and jumping between them as opposed to getting off and the vehicles just pottering around and whatnot. I like the idea of just having some smashes, keep everyone on there. Awesome. Right, last consideration. You have to have enough boys to pick up the scrap that you want. Sounds obvious, but it's very easy in this game to sort of upgrade the miniatures, the boys that you have got, to a level where you don't have very many of them. And I wouldn't expect to have more than sort of between 5 and 8 miniatures on the table, to be honest. Boys, orcs, that is. So you'll have probably 8 or more if you add your trucks and things to it. So yeah, you're not going to have all that many there. So you need to have need to keep that in mind, really, when you're building it. You need to have enough to grab that scrap. After all, a lot of the scenarios do rely on grabbing that scrap, and that, of course, is the best way of progressing your mob and making your vehicle stronger and expanding, buying more boys, that sort of thing. Right then, you've chosen all your guys. You've taken some things into consideration on the options you're choosing. You've got your vehicles. You've equipped your vehicles. Then you need to roll for starting experience. So, each different level, youths or boys and knobs, they all roll for a different amount of experience. And that is in the in the rule book. So yeah, have a look at that, and that'll tell you what to roll. And the idea being that the orcs can start off at different levels, and it just adds a little character straight off the bat to the mob that you're using. Right then, last thing to take into consideration or to do before you start a game is the mob rating calculation. So this is the cost of your warriors and vehicles in teeth, plus 10% of your experience rounding up. I think that's what I've got here. Yeah, that looks about right. So, yeah, that's basically it. So what that does, the reason it's important is that if you're facing somebody and they've got a higher mob rating than you, it does determine whether you're going to get an experience boost and that sort of thing by facing them. And helps smaller mobs catch up with the bigger ones when they're in a long-running campaign. It's not all that important if you're just playing a one-off game, but if you're playing a campaign, it is rather important. Right then, I think I've covered everything. Hopefully that's given you an idea of the order that you need to think about things. So knobs, then vehicles, spanners for the vehicles, and then the rest of your boys for picking up the stuff. And then, of course, equipping all of that. Right. Hopefully I've covered everything. If there's something I've missed or if you've got any questions, put them down in the description. Of course, I'm hoping to get some more of these videos up soon on the different subjects. I'm not the #1 expert or anywhere near experienced with Gorkamorka, mainly because it's fairly hard to get games for me of this. However, I love building the things and I love playing the game, and yeah, I just felt that it was important to get something like this out there where I can sort of help people to get started, because of course getting started is the best way of getting more people playing. Right then, yeah, hopefully that's covered everything. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Stay well, guys.